It's time we have finally talked about BattleTech. Not the whole BattleTech universe, but the BattleTech game from 2018. Simply put, this is another game similar to Mechwarrior V that I have reviewed in the past. Instead of the combat being first person, it is all done in a turn-based style similar to XCOM and many games of the like. Like a lot of games I review on this channel, the premise sounds awesome, but is it really that good of a game? Also, I'll be playing with all the DLC, as without it, the base game is lacking in a lot of variation. When you start up a game, you can either pick the campaign or jump into the sandbox career. Similar to what I did for Mechwarrior V, we will focus on the career aspect of the game and manage the day-to-day life. For the game, you have quite a bit of customization options for the difficulty, as well as a fairly in-depth creator of your main character. You can also pick the character's backstory, which will determine its starting stats. And now that we have finished creating our character, we will now lead our mech warriors to either victory or bitter defeat. Since I randomized our mech, we have a pretty okay start of the mechs. Our two medium mechs are the Blackjack and the Vindicator, while our three light mechs consist of a Regener and two commandos. Due to its offensive capabilities, I will be manning the Blackjack until we get a heavier mech. I also received an assassin mech from one of the DLCs that I've owned, but it isn't anything to write home about, unfortunately. Since we are ultimately a mercenary company, we will need to earn that cash money boy by completing missions to the best of our abilities. Since we only have a handful of mechs, we will also need to be careful to not accumulate too much damage as well. Most missions also do not have any weight restriction, so it's always recommended to go as heavy as you can. Outside of the amount of skulls each mission has, it's hard to know what mechs the enemies will have, or if you'll get surrounded by way too many units. For my first mission, I chose a battle in a polar biome with fellow mech warriors Mothman, Chili, and Jaxonis, each piloting the Vindicator, the Jenner, and the Commando respectively. Safe to say this lineup won't intimidate many others, as we also have low stats across the board, so we will need to overcome this with great tactical play. For how these battles play out, this is where you'll be spending a majority of your time in. As for what the battles are, they play out in a turn-based manner with the obvious comparisons to XCOM. You get one move, one action, and can also sprint at the cost of your action. There's also active abilities you can unlock depending on how each of the pilots are built, which cost initiative points to use. Despite how slow the game can feel at times, there's nothing more satisfactory than methodically taking out other mechs piece by piece. The overall concept of these battles are great, but man, the early game is freaking brutal. You can play a mission that is only 1 star in difficulty, but end up in an unwinnable situation where you have no choice but to withdraw. This can involve additional lances showing up to ruin your day, or you just getting bombarded with missiles from enemies you can't even see. If you're lucky enough, you can leave with your tail between your legs and get an honorable retreat to avoid additional repair costs and headaches. If not, it's basically fight until you can, or you'll get a dishonorable retreat and piss off your employer. One thing I will give credit, however, is the variety of missions and biomes you can participate in. Outside of your standard battles, you can participate in assassination missions, escort missions, defense missions, ambush missions, recovery missions, target acquisition missions, and several more. All these mission types help to add a ton of replay value. There's also a crap ton of biomes, with my favorite being the urban environments. Hopping on buildings for leverage, then destroying enemies on top of them never gets old. I will say though to stay away from escort missions, as those tend to be a bit buggy. The vehicles you end up escorting often get stuck and don't progress to the appropriate destination. The DLCs released included Flashpoint missions, which are basically mini campaigns you can participate in. While the rewards are certainly worth it, I would recommend for you to heed my warning, as these missions can not only be challenging, but also come with very strict weight limits. I usually wait a bit before tackling these, although the rewards can definitely be worth it. After battle, you can choose your salvage if that's what you negotiated in the contract, as well as view a summary of your stats. If you've completed any optional objectives, you will also get a bit of boost to pay, mostly a 10% increase or so. If any pilot is injured, they will have to wait in the medical bay for quite a bit of time. If there's any structural damage, the mechs will need to be repaired in a queue, although a slightly damaged mech can still participate in battle. This is when your main enemy, known as Time, will make an appearance. Every 30 days, you'll need to pay your bills, so doing as many missions to maintain a healthy budget within that time is recommended. It is best to avoid downtime as much as possible and always be doing something, whether that is participating in missions or traveling to other worlds to seek better opportunities. The management aspect outside of combat is pretty in-depth and something I would have liked to have seen included in Mechwarrior 5. Outside of getting to know your crew and buying various mechs and parts, you can also upgrade your ship to improve facilities such as shortening repair time, increasing the amount of mech bays, and even shortening travel time. The last one in particular I wish you could have done in Mechwarrior 5. You can also spend experience points to level up your pilot, which can lead to them with their own specializations. As cool as this sounds, I found certain active and passive abilities to be far more useful than others. Being able to have higher initiative to go earlier in a turn is just too good to pass up, especially for how often you can get overwhelmed. There's also random events that occur involving your crew and Mechwarrior shenanigans. This can involve events such as depressed pilots drinking on the job, or even pilots fighting amongst themselves. Depending on what you have available to you will allow you to select the following options. I don't mind these personally as it adds a bit of something, although the consequences for some can be surprisingly brutal. I also prefer the vanilla customization here compared to the vanilla customization offered in Mechwarrior 5. When you buy or find or put together a mech via salvage, it starts out as a blank slate and is 100% up to you on how you want to customize it. There are no restrictions in terms of what size laser you can use or what size ballistic weapon you can use. If you're given 3 laser slots and the weight permits it, you can slap on 3 ERPPCs and call it a day. For my mechs, I usually try to maximize the armor as much as possible and work within those parameters. It's always enjoyable getting a new mech to play around with, which is why I enjoy the BattleTech universe so much. And I know that a lot of you may say that all the problems I've mentioned in this game can be adjusted with mods. That is true, but if I include mods in every game that I review, then every game is a 10 out of 10 since it can just be modded in any way, shape, or form. However, I can comment on how mod-friendly this game is, which unfortunately does not have any workshop support. It's a shame too, since there's a pretty big modding community here that has done some great work. Mechwarrior 5 has workshop support, so it's a bit disappointing to not see it here. And before we wrap things up, I just have a couple of comments in regards to the presentation. For the graphics, they are alright, although there are a ton of graphical issues within the battles. Shots that do damage end up looking like misses from a visual standpoint and vice versa. Audio wise, the sound effects are solid, but nothing spectacular. Same goes for the music as well. Overall, not much home to write about from a presentation perspective. Overall, I did enjoy my time with BattleTech, although I do have some issues throughout it. For every benefit I enjoy, like the management aspect of the game and the amount of content to play with, it suffers from an overall unbalanced combat system and an incredibly tough early game. The mid to late game does get much better, however, with better mechs and whatnot, but the combat is still pretty slow and mediocre at that time. Outside of the preferred customization here, I find it hard to get back into, especially with Mechwarrior 5 and the wonderful modding community there. With Mechwarrior 5 still getting new DLC and separate clans game currently in the works, I wish we would honestly get a sequel to BattleTech to improve on what is currently here. Whether or not that'll happen is another matter entirely. Thank you all for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.